Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to the Heartland Institute for hosting this incredible forum here in Zurich, Switzerland. And I apologize in advance for taking up the rest of the 3 hours with my talk. So, my title today is The Great Reject: How the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset Agenda is Faring 6 years after COVID. Now, the phrase Great Reset came about, I think the first mention was 2014, but it really didn't hit until June of 2020, right during the COVID lockdown era when Klaus Schwab declared now is the time for a great reset of the world. And then you had every world leader parrot, from Justin Trudeau to the Europeans to the UK Prime Minister, all this, a great time for a great reset, great reset. And then, of course, build back better, the next. The book I wrote in 2022 was The Great Reset: Global Elites and the Permanent Lockdown. Yes, it went head to head with Glenn Beck. Yes, Glenn Beck beat me, but on sales anyway. Both great books, I would say. Next, the World Economic Forum was once riding high. It reminds me of those old, Hollywood documentaries. It was riding high until one day, they came crashing down. The reality of the, drugs and high lifestyle. Well, the World Economic Forum was at the supreme of their influence and height from, say, 2020 through 2023, or at least. And they were dictating, as Klaus Schwab would say, we penetrate the cabinets around the world. And they truly were penetrated. They had penetrated, and they still have penetrated the cabinets. So I'm going to tell you how the once mighty have fallen, but they're not down and they're not out necessarily completely. They're down and they're regrouping. And we'll get into Larry Fink and what he's up to. But what Klaus Schwab said next was the pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world. And that's exactly what they tried to do next. Every country from the United, this is Klaus Schwab, every country from the US to China must participate. You don't have a choice. Every industry from oil, gas, tech must be transformed. In short, we need a great reset of capitalism. Next. So in my book, The Great Reset: Global Elites and the Permanent Lockdown, available at Amazon and everywhere fine books are sold. All right, shameless self-promotion. But they were looking for the intentional collapse, restriction of energy, food, transportation, free speech, property ownership, and financial system, things like ESG, the net zero banking. And they were looking to basically be in charge of everything. This is the James Bond villain. This is the mastermind of everything, of all the evil. Next, we should be on the slide. This is you'll own nothing and be happy. That was their expression. You'll own nothing and be happy. And to that end, they did everything they could. First of all, you had private equity assets start buying up U.S. farmland, buying up real estate. You had the direction of the World Economic Forum essentially infiltrating the banking system with the Net Zero Banking Alliance of the United Nations and ESG. And the goal was to make this more and more restrictive for the average person. They were looking for a modern version of medieval serfdom. You'll own nothing and be happy. Next. They warned 1 billion people would be displaced by climate change. So at the time in 2020, they proposed this, the first time it really came on my radar to this extent, a merging of sort of public health and climate change. And climate change was going to be a great threat, similar to the pandemic. They went after meat restrictions next. Meat would be an occasional treat, not a staple for the good of the environment and our health. So we were going to be severely restricted on meat. This, of course, led to the insect promotion eating. This, of course, led to the vegetable processed burger, ultra processed, 22 some ingredients with isolated pea proteins, etc. And even the CNN nutritionist called the vegan movement. She said these are not healthy. If you're looking for something, eat a low-fat burger of real meat. This is not the way you'd want to go. And of course, it led to the lab-grown meat, which is separate and distinct from everything else, which is essentially stem cells pulled from a cow, sheep, pig, put into a petri dish, then put into a steel vat, allowed to fester into an amorphous blob, which is then allowed to grow and process in a process that looks like the pink goo when you see the McDonald's, not to dig on McDonald's, but the chicken nuggets. how they're made. And eventually they tout that they're printed on a 3D printer. You can have your 3D printed lab grown salmon, your pork, your steak. And this was supposed to be the idea. And Bill Gates was very explicit that we need to essentially end farming in the Western world. And he said this explicitly. He told MIT at a review in an interview, I think this was from 2001 or two, that the time was now to basically move meat production from the farm to the laboratory. I say it that way because it conjures up images of Frankenstein, laboratory. Next, your spending was restricted by what government deems sensible. This was the whole idea of the digital currency. Again, everything I'm saying is not like past tense, we won, let's celebrate. But this was the momentum and the shift. And I'll get to why they're failing or why their momentum has significantly shifted. The central bank digital currency, Joe Biden was all in the U.S., issuing executive orders to start studying that. But even this was UK Telegraph. The Bank of England, the ministers actually said government will decide what you can spend only on what the government deems sensible. Fossil fuels, meat, tobacco, firearms. I doubt that the architects of the central bank digital currency would deem those sensible. Next. Renowned COVID brought along a clash of, say, the expertocracy and the appeal to authority. The renowned John Ioannidis, I always mess up his name, Ioannidis, from Stanford University, epidemiologist. He actually said there was a clash between two schools of thought, authoritarian public health versus actual science, and science lost. That's what happened during the COVID lockdowns and the COVID hysteria. And this, of course, next led to the idea with central bank digital currency, if you violated vaccine mandates, mask mandates, stay-at-home orders, lockdown orders, you would have your card declined. And in my book, I went details around the world, from Africa to Australia to New Zealand, people who couldn't actually have access to their own banking. And of course, we know what Justin Trudeau did in Canada, declared all of the trucker protests, the Freedom Convoy, to be domestic terrorists, ergo ordered the banks who had no problem following orders to debank and not allow these truckers to have access to their own money, not allow people helping them. If you sold them donuts or coffee, you would have problems accessing your own money potentially. Next. The 230 medical journals back in 2021 declared that COVID response, the lockdowns and the authoritarian appeal to authority, was a template for climate change. Climate is the greatest threat to global public health, say 230 medical journals, and declared they groups agreed that the response to the COVID-19 pandemic could be a template for the level and degree of the emergency response necessary for climate change. Again, viruses and climate change merging together with public health. Next. The CO2 monitoring was proposed. This was MasterCard, a thing called the dichotomy card with the United Nations merged. And they were going to essentially enable tracking of your carbon footprint on every purpose. This has not gone away, sadly. This is actually still very much alive. It would monitor and cut off spending when you hit your carbon max. And this was what happens when corporate world joins forces with the United Nations climate agenda. Next, one of the benefits for the Great Reset was they had a lot more members after their advocacy of the COVID lockdown. The COVID lockdowns created, and I'm quoting Fast Company magazine, a new billionaire every 50 hours as millions brace for extreme poverty. It's been estimated to be one of the largest transfers of wealth from the poor and middle class to the wealthy, as the billionaire class benefited. Even the absurdity of France banning 2 hour